When you hear the word sniper, your mind instantly paints a very specific, highly romanticized picture. You imagine a silent, unseen ghost hidden deeply in the shadows, carefully holding a sleek, lightweight rifle, meticulously calculating windage and elevation to take out a high-value human target with surgical, quiet precision. But in the desperate, terrifying early days of the Second World War, the British military completely redefined what it meant to be a combat sniper. They were not training their men to hunt enemy officers, and they certainly were not concerned with the concept of stealth. They were actively hunting rolling, fire-breathing fortresses made of hardened German steel. To successfully kill a tank with a single bullet, you cannot use a sleek, lightweight weapon. You need a shoulder-fired cannon. You need a piece of machinery so impossibly massive, unwieldy, and violently punishing to fire that it was widely considered a brutal form of physical punishment just to carry it into the battlefield. It was a weapon that required its operator to absorb the kind of kinetic shockwave that would shatter the bones of an ordinary man. Today, we are strapping in to examine the absolute peak of early World War II man-portable firepower. We are looking at the heavy, brutal, and shoulder-shattering reality of the Boy's anti-tank rifle, unequivocally the heaviest infantry sniper of the early war. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am Dr. James Hoffer, a military historian and firearms technology specialist. We spend an overwhelming amount of time on this channel examining the sleek, highly refined tactical weapons of modern warfare. But today we are looking at an era of absolute mechanical desperation. We are stepping back into the desperate early days of the Second World War to examine a weapon that was entirely built on the philosophy of overwhelming blunt force trauma. We are closely examining a firearm that aggressively pushed the absolute physical limits of what a single human soldier could be expected to securely carry and effectively fire in active combat. Let us dive headfirst into the massive, clunky mechanics of the Boy's anti-tank rifle. To fundamentally understand the staggering scale of this weapon, we have to look at the rapidly evolving armored warfare of the late 1930s. Tanks were becoming significantly faster, their armor was growing thicker by the month, and standard infantry platoons were utterly defenseless against them. Firing at an advancing panzer with a standard Lee-Enfield rifle was identical to throwing handfuls of gravel at a bank vault. The British military urgently tasked Captain H.C. Boys, a brilliant small arms designer at the legendary Enfield facility, with creating a rifle capable of piercing light armor at combat ranges. The mathematical solution was the .55 Boys cartridge. This was not a standard lead bullet. It was a massive 13.9 millimeter armor-piercing projectile featuring a solid steel, or later, a highly dense tungsten core. The brass casing was incredibly thick and featured a prominent reinforced belt at the base to handle the extreme internal chamber pressures required to push this heavy chunk of metal to a blistering 3,200 feet per second. But firing a cartridge of this immense, explosive magnitude from a shoulder-fired platform presented a terrifying engineering problem. The sheer, violent rearward momentum generated by this cartridge would instantly shatter the collarbone of the shooter if fired from a normal wooden rifle stock. To safely harness this explosive physics experiment, the rifle itself had to be built exactly like a heavy piece of industrial machinery. The resulting weapon tips the scales at an agonizing 35 pounds empty. It is over 5 feet long and looks more like a piece of heavy construction equipment than a precision firearm. The heavy steel receiver is actually mounted on a sliding rail system inside the wooden stock, featuring a massive, heavy-duty industrial shock absorber spring. When you fire the weapon, the entire upper assembly violently recoils backward on this steel sled, compressing the heavy spring to successfully soak up a fraction of the devastating kinetic energy. The muzzle is tipped with a massive, aggressive muzzle brake specifically designed to redirect the expanding explosive gases sideways and backward, literally pulling the heavy gun forward against the shooter's shoulder to counteract the kick. It feeds from a large, heavy 5-round box magazine that bizarrely mounts directly on top of the receiver, entirely obscuring the shooter's peripheral vision and forcing the iron sights to be offset entirely to the left side of the gun. Now, before we meticulously describe the terrifying physical reality of what actually happens to the human body when you attempt to harness this massive 35-pound anti-tank sniper, I want to pause and pose a very specific practical question to you. Imagine you are a frontline soldier in 1940. Your commanding officer hands you this massive 35-pound steel crowbar and tells you that you are now the designated anti-tank gunner for your entire platoon. You must physically carry this exhausting weight on your shoulder during endless miles of marching, knowing that when the enemy tanks finally arrive, you have to lay completely still in the freezing mud and allow this weapon to violently kick you in the chest. Would you have the physical courage and endurance to carry the boy's rifle? Or would you demand a different tactical solution? What is your absolute upper limit for the dead weight you would be willing to carry into a combat zone? Please carefully drop your thoughts and your personal combat limits into the comments section below right now, because I am highly curious to see who among you would bravely volunteer to carry the platoon's absolute heaviest weapon, and I will be personally reading and responding to all of your answers. When you finally get down into the dirt and properly position yourself behind the boy's anti-tank rifle, the required firing stance is deeply unnatural and inherently uncomfortable. You absolutely cannot fire this weapon standing or kneeling. The crushing weight and the violent recoil make it a strict physical impossibility. You must lay completely prone, aggressively digging the heavy steel bipod directly into the earth. You press the thick, heavily padded rubber butt plate against your shoulder, grasping the rear pistol grip tightly. Your forward view is immediately blocked by the massive top-mounted magazine, giving you severe tunnel vision down the awkward offset sights. When you finally squeeze the heavy steel trigger, the resulting explosion is absolutely catastrophic. The muzzle brake belches a blinding, concussive fireball that instantly kicks up a massive cloud of dust and debris, completely blinding the shooter and immediately revealing your hidden position to the enemy armor. Despite the heavy internal shock absorbers and the massive muzzle brake, the recoil is still an overwhelming, brutal physical shove that violently rattles your teeth and sends a deep, agonizing shockwave straight down your spine. Medical reports from the era frequently detailed unfortunate soldiers suffering from severely bruised shoulders, chronic neck pain, and even occasional detached retinas from repeatedly firing this brutal weapon during mandatory training exercises. It was incredibly loud, it was painfully heavy, and it was undeniably terrifying to operate. Ultimately, the glorious, heavy-hitting era of the boy's anti-tank rifle was incredibly short-lived. By 1942, the rapid, terrifying advancement of German tank armor rendered the .55 caliber round practically obsolete, as it simply bounced harmlessly off the thicker frontal armor of the newer Panzer models and the legendary Tiger tanks. The brutal heavy rifle was rapidly replaced by explosive, shoulder-fired shaped charge weapons like the American bazooka and the British PIAT, which offered vastly superior armor-penetrating capabilities at a fraction of the physical weight. However, the boys unequivocally remains the undisputed heavyweight champion of early war infantry rifles. It proudly stands as an awe-inspiring historical monument to a highly specific, desperate era of combat engineering when massive battlefield problems were solved with overwhelming, brutal, staggering mass. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into the extreme, heavy-hitting history of World War II firearms engineering. I am Dr. James Hoffer, and I will eagerly see you in the next one.